Welcome, everyone. My name is Ruben East. I'm a counselor for trade in Canada's mission to the EU. Thank you very much for coming. We have a packed house. I think we were even getting chairs at the last minute. We did so well, so very pleased about that. Welcome also to those online. Bienvenue. We have lots of people calling in from Canada as well, so good morning to you. Good afternoon to everyone. We have a very packed program, as I think you all have seen, and we're very much looking forward to it. Just maybe a couple of things to mention. Really, the overview in a nutshell is we'll have a few introductory speeches, and then we will have our keynote speaker that is calling in from Quebec, former Premier Jean Charest. Then we'll have a little bit of a break so we can have our refreshments and you can network. Since we have business associations, companies here, we're very pleased to do that. So that'll be great. Then we'll come back. We'll have two panels. And then, of course, following that, we'll have a reception. So that's sort of the ordre du jour, if I may. And since I'm up here, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you all to our ambassador, Dr. Ailish Campbell, who will come in a moment to deliver opening remarks. I'll just say a couple of things about her because I must say she has a very, if I do say so, a very impressive resume, including as a trade negotiator with the WTO, something very dear to my heart as a trade negotiator myself. And of course, she's been a senior executive in a number of federal government departments, Privy Council Office, Industry Canada, Finance Canada, and most recently, before she came to be our ambassador, she was Canada's Chief Trade Commissioner, which sits in global affairs. This is, and in that position, you get to know, of course, businesses and business associations very, very well. So extremely well placed to speak to the theme of an audience that we had primarily in mind for this. So with that, I would like to welcome Ailish Campbell, our ambassador, to the stage. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, bonjour, bienvenue, welcome to Espace Canada. I hope you'll get to meet our incredible team, Nita and everyone, Fatima and the whole team who've put on our incredible coffee. Warm thanks to them as well as to Nicola and to the IT team. I want to give a special thanks right off the bat to our keynote speaker, the former Premier of Quebec, l'ancien Premier Ministre de Québec, l'Honorable Monsieur Jean Charest. I want to thank Jean in particular for being one of the many early champions of this agreement when it was under negotiation. Of course, once something is successful, many grandfathers and grandmothers and mothers and fathers come out of the woodwork. But in this case, Jean was really a true champion right from the start, so I want to thank him for that. Je souhaite une chaleureuse bienvenue aussi à mes collègues des provinces. Et je souhaite également la bienvenue aux collègues européens, y inclut le commissaire européen représenté Matthias Jorgensen. Thanks to you and your team at DG Trade for all your hard work implementing this agreement. And of course, a very big thanks on behalf of Minister Mary Ng and of course EVP Dombrovskis, who together in our CETA joint committees are constantly on the go to continue to modernize and improve this relationship. It's been negotiated. Today we're celebrating 5 years, but the important thing is this is a living agreement that continues to respond to business conditions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Thanks to Sam Ayub, thank you, the president of the Canada-EU Economic Chamber, and Mark Camilleri, who's here with us. Thank you, Mark, president of the Canada-EU Trade and Investment Association, and all of your teams for all of their work bringing together Canadian and EU businesses. And as well, thanks to all of you who are joining us, Canadian businesses, investors, researchers, our EDC colleagues who have joined us. Fantastic to see you in the house today. And of course, I'm very enthusiastic when I see that we have international businesses with us, partners from the US, Mexico, Chile, our CPTPP partners, Ukraine, the UK, and others who know Canada's total dedication to global supply chains, our many economic and trade agreements that give us access to 1.5 billion of the world's richest consumers, and of course our dedication to the WTO and the World Trade Organization. When Prime Minister Trudeau asked me to take this role on 2.5 years ago now, it was in the middle of the pandemic. And if anyone had told me You're going to come in the middle of a lockdown, work on vaccine supply chains, work on economic resilience at a time when borders are closing, no businesses will be moving, and then on top of it, and very unfortunately, we'll talk a little bit about this, a war will break out, Russia's war of aggression, continuing after the 2014 invasion of Crimea. I might have said that this sounds like a little bit of a stress test. This sounds like we've really got quite a scenario on our hands, but that turned out not to be the most challenging of scenarios that one could have envisioned. That turned out to be reality. So I do just want to take a moment and also recognizing that it's been a very difficult few weeks in financial markets, especially for venture-backed and growth firms. I just want to thank each and every one of you in business for your resilience, your continued dedication to customers, and the continued work here on this partnership. It's been a wild ride, but this is a good time to have good friends, including Canada and the EU. The context that we're in now, of course, is Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. I hope you saw our Ukraine flag. We fly it proudly here alongside our own until the war of aggression ends. The EU, as a result, with partners like Canada and the G7, has taken what have been unprecedented steps, including export controls, and happy to discuss at the break with those of you who are in dual-use technology businesses what sanctions and export controls have meant for your business, but it's been an unprecedented year since the war started. We're building on a very deep partnership, luckily, as President von der Leyen said in her address to Parliament just a few weeks ago. Hard times reveal true friends, as I noted off the top, and this is what we are, true and trusted friends. So that ongoing dialogue that we've created through CETA, which enables us to look at very specific supply chains from fertilizer to food security to critical raw materials, is exactly why we're gathering here today. I do want to celebrate the many achievements that we've had over the last 5 years. Everyone knows I love numbers, so here's a few. Record highs when it comes to bilateral merchandise trade, which reached 77 billion euro or 106 billion Canadian dollars. And we can talk about each other's statistics depending on whose import and export data you use. But I pulled our data. It's 56% higher trade today than pre-CETA levels, which is very impressive. And total bilateral services trade reached almost 30 billion euro. En ce qui concerne l'investissement, les chiffres sont tout aussi impressionnants. L'investissement direct canadien dans l'Union européenne s'élève à 160 milliards d'euros et l'investissement étranger direct de l'Union européenne au Canada à 183 milliards d'euros. As this group here knows well, this agreement is also meant to enable small businesses. This is really meant to empower more businesses, and I think we have a representative from Shopify with us here today. Of course, e-commerce businesses, micro businesses, people doing gigs out of their basement as second and third jobs. These are all the different faces of exporters that we're seeing be enabled by CETA. And as I say, e-commerce is particularly important to this relationship. SMEs have benefited from CETA with an increase in exports to the EU of over 17% over the last 5 years. And that, of course, we know translates into jobs and more opportunities from coast to coast to coast. Le commerce entre le Canada et l'Union européenne est donc en croissance, it's growing, et il est réalisant même pendant une pandémie mondiale, et les entreprises de toute taille profitent des avantages de la ICG. We warmly welcome in the last year another fantastic development, which is the national ratification of CETA. Who are my technical guys? You say CETA is provisionally in force until it's completely ratified by all 27 member states. But what that means is, 98% of this deal is in force and growing and proving itself out. And because it's a mixed competency agreement, I'm looking at Ruben, who is our CETA legal expert. He'll give me the cane if I say anything incorrect here. You can tell me later at the break. But of course, we look for ratifications by all member states. So to have the Netherlands and Germany ratify this agreement in the last few months has just been absolutely fantastic. And there's only 10 more to go. And Matthias, that's just a little more homework for you. And our fantastic EU member state partners will be with you every step of the way. I want to highlight as well the incredible opportunities that we have in this agreement. Part of that comes from the regulatory cooperation and the embedded ongoing dialogues that we have. And I think there's going to be a first panel today that will be looking at opportunities to deepen regulatory cooperation, and that's about reducing the friction and the cost and the red tape, which is so essential for business. So let's keep going on that. It's also important, I think, to talk about our work on climate change, on clean technology and energy, especially, of course, as Europe addresses its energy dependence on Russia. In 2021, Canada exported over 800 million in clean tech products. And of course, whenever I see a merchandise trade export, I think about the embedded services and all the services, including O&M, to come. So that's a fantastic number. Let's do more. A few days ago, I was delighted to attend an event highlighting Northland Power's role in the Baltic Power offshore wind farm in the Polish parts of the Baltic Sea. And Sam, you were there with me. It was a fantastic event, also with Danish manufacturing, of course, in the wind turbines themselves. This is just one concrete way that Canada and the EU, with a fantastic anchor Polish partner, can contribute to enhancing Europe's energy security and its ambitious Repower EU goals. Our two leaders, Prime Minister Trudeau and President von der Leyen, during her visit to Canada, also reinforced our continuing work on energy security, on the R&D to develop hydrogen. I want to take note, too, of our nuclear, LNG, geothermal, and other clean tech technologies. Really think of Canada as an entire suite of opportunities. And I think we have both our own technologies on energy saving, but I do want to take note, one of the most impressive figures that I've seen has been on the energy saving side. There's actually been a diminution of demand, but an application of true energy saving technologies at the household, industry, and sector levels. And I think we've got a lot to learn from our EU partners. And I know we're going to continue to collaborate more on sustainable agriculture that addresses climate change. So again, just so much opportunity for R&D and innovation. That's why I do want to flag the EU's flagship research program, Horizon Europe, and negotiations are very well underway for Canada to be a partner country with that. Our Canada-EU digital partnership, which fosters collaboration on artificial intelligence, on cybersecurity. I want to just make an important crosswalk, of course, to our NATO partners. Just down the street, Canada isn't just your economic partner. We're also your security partner. And Canada's largest battalion of forces outside of course, our own nation is located right now in the EU, in Latvia, on Operation Forward Presence. So whether it's economic, social, climate action, environment, or defense and security, Canada is your partner every step of the way. My team here in Brussels, if anyone here from my team, Ruben, I think most of the team is there at the back. Raise your hand so people know who to talk to at the networking break. Yeah, I know, everyone loves this part of the speech when the ambassador makes you put your hand up. Help me, Rob, and your EDC team. You're all here. These are fantastic people to network with at the break. Please come talk to us now and any time. And to all the businesses here. Just an incredibly warm welcome. Let's keep talking. Let's keep doing business. Let's keep solving problems together. Et j'ai hâte d'entendre parler des possibilités prometteuses qui ne manqueront pas d'émerger de l'environnement d'aujourd'hui. I know there's going to be lots of great things that emerge out of this conference today. And as I say, I look forward to us continuing to talk as very close best friends. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I'd like to invite Sam Ayoub from the Canada-EU Economic Chamber to introduce European Commission representative, please.
Thank you, Ruben. I'm glad to have a full house here. It's very impressive. So I guess we made a great job, Mark and I and Julian, as we've co-organized, I should say, the CETA 5-year anniversary already, and looking forward for the next 5 years. If I can say, for the last 2-3 years, we mentioned that we had a rough a bit, to say the least, and the key word here in Brussels and around the world was disruption, and referring to the supply chain disruptions. But now in 2023, 2024, and beyond, I think the next keyword would be to be stable, and to be predictable. I think Canada matches that perfectly. And it's very important now that with the war in Ukraine, it's even more important to have a stable country to deal with when you're investing millions of dollars, as VW invested a few weeks back, or announced that a few weeks back in Canada. So it's very important. You've got a real nice partner, and especially for Europeans to look forward for today's challenges, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow's challenges. It's very important that Canada is part of the solution, and we're ready to do business with the Europeans. So now I would like to, we have a nice set of conference speakers here today, and I would like to introduce the first one, the keynote speakers, Matthias Jorgensen from the DG Trade at the European Commission. So Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This it's really a real pleasure to be here today. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I think I can fully subscribe. That's the first thing I want to say with what Eilish just said. You know, we really are the best of friends. I think we were always very good friends. But you know who your friends are in times of trouble, and things have been difficult on many fronts, in many areas, and in many instances in the last couple of years. And I think one of the things that we really feel that we can do with Canada is to rely on you. You are, as Sam also said, it's about stability, it's about resilience, and we have helped each other out in a number of areas in trade, for example, in relation to vaccines, but also in many other areas, and we will be able to help each other out in the future. And I think that's really a very key component. This stability, this trust that we have among each other, which gives us a very strong basis to discuss certain issues, but certainly even more to build the future. So I'm going to talk a bit about why we think that it's so important to commemorate, and why it's such a good moment to commemorate that we have 5 years of partnership with Canada. And the reason is that times are uncertain. Since this agreement entered provisionally into force, as Eilish said, but I think very strongly provisionally, I would say. We've had some big changes in the world. There have been geopolitical events which have resulted in tectonic shifts. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed how incredibly vulnerable we can be and how dependent we can be on each other. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shattered peace and a number of received wisdoms, I don't think only here in Europe, but also beyond. And that is probably the reason why I think Canada, who is not in Europe, but who is fully engaged and fully understanding of the importance of standing side by side with us when we face that challenge. So for us, the overall relationship with Canada is broad and comprehensive. It covers lots of issues, but in trade, it's very, very deep, and it's a central pillar, I would say, of the relation that we have, because it gives us a strong platform to create gains for our businesses, gains for our citizens, possibilities for civil society in a much broader sense, and that's really what a strong relationship is about. And we are not only, I think, strong allies when it comes to trying to build our relationship between ourselves. If we look at the world today, both the EU and Canada clearly believe that there are a number of issues that we can only solve together and that we have to live together. Other countries around the world believe in maybe moving ahead more unilaterally or trying to find one or two other partners to move ahead. Canada and the EU understand that if we want to solve the problems and the challenges of this world, whether they are security related, whether they're trade related, or whether they're climate change related, we have to work together with the friends we have. And that's, for example, and that's one of the reasons why we're very happy to be part of the very Canada-driven effort in the WHO in the form of the Ottawa Group, for example, where we try to draw forward a number of the reform-related issues that we need to address in the WHO. Eilish, you're a numbers person, and so I prepared myself a little bit to avoid repeating what you said. But I think there are a couple of figures that I would like to come up with. First of all, each of us, we are important by ourselves, but together we actually represent 20% of world GDP. And if we look at it, not only has trade gone up generally overall, but it's gone up in an impressive manner in a number of key areas. If we look at base metals, EU imports from Canada have gone up 143% since CETA entered into force provisionally. Minerals went up 131%. Energy imports increased 70%. And import of fertilizers increased by 225%, to give some examples. And I think that's important because it also shows, for us certainly, that when we get into trouble in terms of our traditional suppliers, some of them which are closer, well, then we've been able to count on Canada to provide us with alternatives and thereby be resilient. But it's not only Canada that's exporting to the EU. It's also clear that EU companies are benefiting from this agreement. German exports of precious metals to Canada. I think not so many sourced in Canada, in Germany, but probably more processed, have increased 905% to a value of 402 million. Belgian exports of pharmaceutical products grew by 163% to a value of 660 million. So it's not only impressive in terms of percentages, I think it's also impressive in figures. And Danish exports of optical products have grown by 28% to a value of 114 million. Some of us are either short-sighted or have other problems, but it also shows that there's really a lot of diversity in our trade. And I think one of the things that we're able to do with Canada, and that's really important, that is that it is a living agreement. I think both Canada and the EU, we're both avid users and of free trade agreements, but we also see that the free trade relations that we have with partners differ. Some of them are static. We see that some countries with whom we make agreements say, oh, okay, we got over the finishing line, now we're going to implement it, just about what's been written there, and then please don't come and make problems. The exciting thing, I think, with Canada is that, yes, we did the agreement. It's very ambitious. It's very innovative. But we said from the beginning, we said no. We got a great basis now. Let's continue building on that. So, for example, in 2021, July 2021, we signed a strategic partnership on raw materials. That was pretty good foresight, I would say, and that has helped us jointly build a secure, sustainable, and resilient raw material value chains, which are clearly indispensable in the world of today. And we know, well, we are also all trying to move forward on a critical minerals club. And for us, it's clear that this issue is something that we will have to build together with Canada. We show that these ties are important. Earlier this month, I think we were really excited to see that the visit of President von der Leyen was very successful. It was really a moment, I think, which underlined the strength of the relationship. And the president emphasized all those points that I just referred to before about the scope and the depth of the relationship. Canada is really key to us in one of the key ambitions of this commission, which is the green transition. You're also key to us in the digital transition, but I think particularly in the clean economy and the clean transition. And in many ways, Canada really is the partner of choice when it comes to avoid being over-reliant on other players. So this was an incredibly successful visit for us. And I know that President von der Leyen really sees as one of the highlights of the year is the speech that she gave in Canada to the Canadian Parliament. Yeah, no, not Congress, the Parliament, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But we're not only doing the easy stuff. We're not only just making big, fluffy, maybe sometimes more general statements about how much we can rely on each other when it comes to clean critical materials. We're also trying to look at the difficult issues. So we, for example, have a very active CETA regulatory cooperation forum, and where we have achieved a groundbreaking cooperation on consumer protection as the EU and Canada have started sharing information on dangerous non-food consumer products. And that's important because these issues, we all know it, these are the issues that with third countries, they can be quite difficult often. And this last year, 10th of March, we concluded negotiations for a mutual recognition agreement concerning the professional qualification of architects. And that will now pave way for the adoption of an MRA, which, once in force, will remove most of the bureaucratic obstacles for EU architects seeking to provide their services in Canada and vice versa. So it's not just about goods. It's not just about us buying raw materials, or us also exporting in a very successful manner our first-class dairy products to Canada, where we see that we have a very satisfactory take-up of the quota that we have. It's also about the economy and the opportunities for people in other sectors, in other business sectors. So where does it take us as regards the future? I think we strongly believe that we cannot rest on our laurels. And I think that as relations with other trading partners will continue, we believe to be subject to uncertainty. The solidity of our bilateral relationship and our possibility to hedge our trade and our possibilities for economic growth in each other is really important. So we need to look forward to continue to capitalize on the strong trust that we have, the continued upward trend on trade and investment that we have, and this overall broad, strong alliance of which trade is a part. So we look forward to continue the work on implementing CETA. We continue working together on getting the ratifications in member states over the line. We are 2 digits still. There's still 10 member countries left. I think our joint ambition is to bring that down to a solid 1-digit number during the year to come. I think politically, I don't think there's been any better moment, so we will certainly push from our side on that, and we will continue to work very closely with you on that. So thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks a lot for organizing this event. I think it's really great, and we look forward to continue to working with Canada in this agreement and building upon it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for that. And now I'd like to invite Mark Camilleri up to introduce the next speaker. You, Mark.
Bonjour, Madame Ambassador, and good afternoon to all of you, and good morning to our guests joining in from Canada. My name is Mark Camilleri. I'm a Canadian-European lawyer based here in Brussels, working with the law firm Camilleri Law. I'm also the president of the Canada-EU Trade and Investment Association, or CUSHA as we like to call it. CUSHA is a Brussels-based not-for-profit organization aimed at promoting the Canada-EU economic and trade agenda in the EU and in Canada. CUSHA works with private sector organizations to help promote, coordinate, and amplify ideas, issues, and events that help promote the Canada-EU trade and investment relationship. I'm proud to say that this is the 4th consecutive year that CUSHA has supported a CETA anniversary event, and this year we're excited to be co-organizing this anniversary event on behalf of the Canadian mission to the EU. Today I have the pleasure, indeed the honor, to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Jean Charest. As Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and Premier of Quebec, and with a public service career spanning almost 30 years, Monsieur Charest is one of Canada's best-known political figures. Monsieur Charest was first elected to the Canadian Parliament in 1984, and at the age of 28, became Canada's youngest cabinet minister as Minister of State for Youth. In 1991, he was named Minister of the Environment and Minister of Industry and Deputy Prime Minister of Canada in 1993. In 1994, Jean Charest was chosen leader of the Federal Progressive Conservative Party, a post he held until 1998, when he became leader of the Quebec Liberal Party. Monsieur Charest became Premier of Quebec in 2003 and went on to break a 50-year-old provincial record by winning 3 consecutive elections. Under Premier Charest's leadership, the Charest government of Quebec initiated an unprecedented labor mobility agreement between France and Quebec, and was best known for a major initiative for the sustainable development of northern Quebec called Plan Nord. Most notably for us today, it was Monsieur Charest who helped initiate the negotiation process of CETA, the agreement we're here celebrating today. Today, Monsieur Charest is a partner at the Canadian law firm of McCarthy Tétrault, where he provides invaluable expertise to the firm's clients with his in-depth knowledge and experience of public policy, corporate Canada, and international matters. Mesdames et Messieurs, the world has seen a great deal of change since the time of CETA negotiations began in earnest in 2007. And so, 5 years after the provisional application of CETA, I can think of no one better placed to give some thoughts on this historic agreement. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce the Honorable Jean Charest.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And I want to thank you for your very generous applause. I regret that I'm not with you in person in Brussels to celebrate this very important 5th anniversary event. And I do want to thank Mark again and his association for inviting me and for the permanent mission of Canada to the EU, our ambassador, Ailish Campbell, who I've had the pleasure of working with in the past and who is one of our top diplomats. And I'm delighted to share some thoughts today with you on this 5th anniversary and tell you a bit of the story, but also put it into some context. And just a few things to remember as we look at our trade story in Canada and in the world. The first one, of course, is to remind ourselves that Canada is and always has been among the top 5 countries in the world in terms of our very high reliance on trade. We are a trading nation. We have a small population base of only now close to 40 million people, but historically Canada has always had a high reliance and a higher reliance on average of other developed countries in regards to trade. Now, the difference between us and other countries, though, is our very high reliance also on the American economy. It hasn't been an exclusive relationship, but it's sort of felt that way for a long time, which has made it a compelling argument to diversify our trade through time. This isn't new. By the way, some of you, you're all too young to remember this, but Trudeau's father, as Prime Minister, had promoted a policy that he had called the third option, which had as an objective to develop stronger trade ties with Europe, which led to the agreement with which we still use today. Previous speaker was talking about President van der Leyen's visit to Canada and the delivery of her remarks, which greatly noticed and appreciated, but they were done in the context of an annual summit that was instituted in 1976 through this agreement. So Europe has always been on our, of course, radar And the construction of Europe in this period of time has also attracted the attention of the world. Interesting that you put it in the context of today, that we saw in parallel the deconstruction of what was the Soviet Union and the construction of the European Union, and how this is relevant to what is happening in the world today. So first thing to keep in mind, how reliant we are in Canada on trade. The second thing is to take a step back and just look at the trade story in the world since the 1980s all the way up to the Great Recession of 0809. And what we saw was an extraordinary period of growth through trade. The growth in trade was much stronger than the growth in world GDP, which made it a locomotive of wealth creation throughout the world. We saw 22 years of reduction in extreme poverty in the world. 22 years, which was broken only in 2019 because of COVID. So there's a bigger story here about trade that's more than just about accounting and numbers and growth and statistics. It is about wealth creation. It is about reduction of poverty and our ability to be able to create a whole new middle class. And of course, that will immediately bring us to the story on Asia and the extraordinary growth in Asia and China in particular, and the arrival of China within the WTO and what that has meant to the world, and back to where we are today. So that's also part of the trade story. And Canada's always understood it that way, by the way. And when we entered into our trade negotiations with Europe, that was very much in the back of our mind, not just the raw trade numbers, but what it meant to us as a society and what it could mean to the world as a society in terms of social benefits and overall benefits for the environment, for climate, and for social justice. Now, one word about this context. Who would have thought 5 years ago that we would be where we are today? A war in Europe, a pandemic, the rise of China as a superpower, to put it very bluntly, in a world where we are seeing more polarization and the formation of what seems to be a formation of new blocs. And I'll make some remarks about that in the end. And this extraordinary period of tension, which is obviously influencing everything we're doing, including trade. But who would have thought 5 years ago that we would be here? And one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, how well has our trade framework served us in this regard? Has it been helpful? Has it been productive? Has it allowed us to do better and do more and to better serve our population? And obviously the answer is yes, from my perspective. But let me talk a bit about how this happened. I was Premier of Quebec in 2000, from 2003 to 2012. In that period of time, in 2007, I was approached by Jeremy Kinsman, a predecessor of Ailish Campbell, who was a friend and one of Canada's great diplomats, who was our ambassador in the EU at the time, who came to me and said, Jean, we are negotiating the equivalent of a FIPA right now with Europe, and it's not going anywhere, and it's not significant, and really no one owns it, and there's no champion of this, when in fact we should be much more ambitious, and in this context, seeking something more significant. Of course, the context was the derailment of the Doha round of the WTO, which brought everyone to ask themselves, well, where do we go next? Apparently, the rumor was that the Commission was looking at entering into trade agreement with developing countries. In the case of Canada, of course, the issue always remained diversification. And so it was put to me that maybe, this was an opportunity for Canada to be more ambitious, but it needed a champion to do it, someone to do it. And that if I was interested, and given the position of Quebec and its relationship with Europe and France in particular, that this may be of interest. The second group of people was Roy McLaren, who was the chair of the Canada-Europe Roundtable, Business Roundtable, with Jason Langridge, who came to us. And then we put together a group of business people to examine this opportunity. And they were all extremely favorable to the idea that we do this. But how do we get the ball rolling? The other step was for me to, in Davos, because as premier, I would be in Davos every year, to meet with the Commissioner of Trade of the European Commission, Peter Mandelson, and to put this proposal to him to enter into a trade agreement, a broader trade agreement with Canada. Now, the reasons that we argued would be of interest to you today. And because we're a small economy relative to the rest of what the bigger economies are, and why, Peter Mandelson asked, well, why would we enter into a trade agreement with Canada? And the arguments that I put to him, there was two of them. One was we do share common values. It will be relatively easy in that sense for us to agree on the broad framework, and we can do something that is going to be precedent setting and will become a model. And we will both be able to use that afterwards in other subsequent trade agreements. But the second argument I put to him, I think, was much more significant. I said to Peter Mandelson at the time, if ever Europe wants to enter into a trade agreement with the United States, it would be a good idea for Europe to do a trade agreement with Canada first. We know from experience, because we love our American neighbors, their friends and their allies, their partners. We had a visit recently by Joe Biden, which was extremely successful and speaks to the quality of that relationship. But the United States is also a superpower. And Canada's learned that, and we manage the relationship with that knowledge. Now, superpowers behave a certain way, and they have certain impulses. And on the issue of trade, one lesson Canada learned in dealing with the United States is that if you enter into a trade agreement with the United States, they reserve themselves the right to interpret the rules, and it's called power. And softwood lumber is a good example of that. Some people I know in the room will be smiling because we've been there. We played, which is fine. That's reality. And the argument I put to Peter Mandelson as I told him that story was, if you have an ambition that you want to enter into a trade agreement with the United States, it would be a good idea to have a trade agreement with Canada to lean on as a precedent. And I think that was one of the arguments that made. And in fact, that is what ensued. Europe and the United States enter into agreements. You'll remember the acronym was TTIP. That was much more controversial than Canada-Europe trade agreement, to the point where I think, and I'm guessing here more than out of raw knowledge, but you'll remember that there was, in the end, some strong opposition to CETA. And I think those who thought that they needed to derail TTIP because they were opposed to it figured out that the road to doing that was derailing CETA, that if they were able to kill the Canada-Europe trade agreement, that would certainly make it impossible to do TTIP. And in fact, TTIP, because of a lack of political will on both sides and the ability to come to agreement, sort of went off the rails. In our case, it was a different story. There was a strong will to do it. And once the European side was engaged, something very interesting happened, because the European side wanted the provinces at the table. On the offensive issues, the European side they had government procurement. You'll remember that Canada is one of the most decentralized countries in the world. There's only one other country I know of more decentralized than Canada, and that is Belgium. And with all respect for our Belgian friends, no one knows how Belgium worked. And I know I remember the period where Yves Leterme was Prime Minister of Belgium, and they had no government for 2.5 years. I think they refer to it as the golden period. And I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that, because we dearly love our Belgian friends. But so we also had that particular experience where the Europeans wanted the provinces at the table. And it's the only time I know of where that in fact happened. And we in Quebec insisted that happened. In fact, we delegated an ex-premier of Quebec, Payamak Johnson, as our negotiator. And Stephen Harper, a few years later, confided to me that the presence of Payamak Johnson as a negotiator for Quebec was instrumental in securing agreement, because if Quebec on certain key controversy issues went along and had an agreement, the other provinces would view that as a cue that this was something that would work. I want to say a word about the Canadian negotiating team, which is absolutely outstanding. It was led by Steve Verol at the time. And if there's anything I've come to appreciate through the years is the extraordinary talent and competence of our Canadian officials and our diplomats throughout the world. Frankly, we don't say it often enough how lucky we are to have such great and competent people on the trade side. They were outstanding. I was in Asia recently. We were briefed by Jay Allen and his team who are negotiating trade agreements with Indonesia and ASEAN. It was very impressive, what we saw and what we heard. So we're in good hands. The Canadians are lucky to be in very good hands. Now, when we started the trade negotiations itself, there's a few interesting things, conversations that happened. One of them is that we would agree that we would put everything on the table, but we also agreed that we were not going to crunch the issues on agriculture. But we needed to avoid pulling stuff off because that would, the danger there was to get into a spiral that we couldn't get out of eliminating issues. And it was a wise decision, one based on trust, that worked well. And in fact, we did end up with tariffs and quotas on things like cheese and beef and pork and veal and sweet corn. And in fact, the Europeans, and I think you alluded to that, are occupying 94% of that tariff allocation on cheese. They've done very well. It's been noticed on the Canadian side. And we have not been as successful on the agricultural side in getting into the market on beef. And so there's work to be done there. But we also agreed that we would protect the cultural sector, which is a particular concern to Canada as an exception, and something the Americans had great difficulty understanding when we negotiated the CUSMA and NAFTA. Now, the negotiations were broad. They dealt with environment issues, the climate, all things on which we were in agreement, and with a view of entering into an agreement that would be precedent setting, and we were successful in doing that. We're very fortunate that the format of implementation in the European Commission is one way in which the Commission can implement and then obtain the assent of member states. And that is progressing. There's a lot of moving parts on that. Take France, for example. On France, President Macron was very supportive of the agreement, but was not able to secure in the previous parliament a majority. It's a plurality that supported it, and then it went to the Senate. And it's been in the Senate ever since, but it's also embroiled in issues relative to agriculture in the French Senate. So better wait for a good window of opportunity, and who knows, present circumstances may favor that because of the conflict. And so on the trade side, we were able to secure this agreement. One anecdote that you will appreciate, because of the close relationship that we had with France, I worked very hard in convincing President Chirac to support us in this, which he did. And I remember meeting Mr. Barroso in Brussels on this, who, in the opening of the conversation, confided to me how astonished he was to have received a call from President Chirac in support of these negotiations. And he said to me, Premier, France never is on the front line of any trade negotiation. They're never the first ones to come out and say we should do it. But in this case, the president called me personally to say France supports this and wants to see this happen. So we did benefit from historically good and trustworthy relationships to advance this. And we're able to deliver a stellar agreement. Now, the numbers speak for themselves. We've seen strong increase in trade, especially in services. Not only in services, but goods also, and in services. Now, what has evolved since then is very interesting because of the energy transition, the issue of climate, on which Canada and Europe is aligned. Think of CBAM in particular, and how that will affect trade and could affect trade. The Americans are not going to have a carbon tax, and one of the preconditions of having a carbon border adjustment mechanism is to have an internal domestic carbon policy. Canada does. And so this has allowed us to work closely together on these issues. But also the issue of strategic minerals is very interesting to see. Canada right now has the favor of the world, and whether it's the United States or Europe, because we have a wealth of strategic minerals in the country. We have them all, and but developing them is going to be a strong challenge. And in parallel to all of this, we've certainly noticed the views of Thierry Breton, who was in Montreal recently, and how the concept of sovereignty seems to dominate the development of policy within the European Commission on issues like semiconductors, strategic minerals, in response to the American Inflation Reduction Act, and the aggressive development of industrial policy now in the world. I mean, this is a new era of unprecedented development of industrial policy. Of course, it's in good part in reaction to China. On the American side, the key word seems to be security and national security, but on the European side, I've noticed the word sovereignty is very much a key word in terms of policy development, in terms of protecting the core interests of the European Union and its member states. Now, this agreement today has become, for us all, I think, a shining light in terms of what we should do. And I've already gone on long, but I want to share a thought with you on where we always dreamt that this could go. Because with the rise of China and of Asia in particular, Canada has its new Indo-Pacific strategy, by the way, which has been very well received. There would be a case to be made that the developing countries, Western countries, should look at the future as a bloc, as a team, the word bloc is maybe a little loaded, but what I'm alluding to is, in our wildest dreams, we would have hoped that there would have been an agreement between NAFTA countries, now CUSMA, United States, and Europe. And why not? I mean, one of the key issues as we look ahead, as we know, is that tariffs it's great to eliminate tariffs, which was done in September of 2017 in one single swoop. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at is who sets the terms of trade in terms of regulations, in terms of norms, those are where the real difficult issues are right now in terms of climate and is there not an opportunity as we look ahead in the world to look at how we could make a common cause and be a united group of countries, Europe and North America, in terms of our trade policies and how we work together. I mean, for me to see an agreement between Europe and CUSMA would be the ultimate achievement in terms of what the CETA led to. But for that to happen requires leadership. And it requires American leadership, which we know in this context is difficult, very difficult. I'm speaking to you from the United States right now, actually, and in the South. It is a source of concern for us as we see the deep polarization of politics within this country. But I don't despair from that. I think that that we may be surprised that in a few years from now, people and leaders will understand the compelling, very compelling opportunity of creating a trade bloc that would be able to help set the right terms of trade for the environment, for climate, for workers' rights, for diversity, for the rights of women, for Aboriginal people, and to make sure that trade is beneficial to the world and it continues to allow us to reduce poverty and to allow us to prosper. So I just leave you with that thought, because at the end, the ultimate ambition would be to be able to reach that goal. Thank you very, very much, and congratulations for organizing this 5th anniversary. We have more work to do, so let's be ambitious and move on. Thank you again for hosting.
Mr. Charest, thank you so much for the wonderful address just now. Very thought-provoking as we go into the break we're just about to have. If you have time, I invite you to stay online. In about 15 minutes, we'll go into some panels that will hopefully pick up on some of the themes you mentioned just now. So I invite the folks that are here in person for about 15 minutes. We'll have a break. There's some refreshments at the back. I invite you to have conversations, including about some of the things that Mr. Charest just mentioned just now. And I'll bring you back shortly, and we'll continue with the two panels. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you. So we'll be starting the first panel. Just waiting for two of our speakers. I think they'll be joining shortly online. So perfect. Good to see you. So my name is Melina Howard. I'll be moderating this panel, and so I will start actually right away because we only have 30 minutes. So it will be short and sweet. So I will ask the speakers to each introduce themselves. Then we have a few questions. And then at the end, there'll be about 5 minutes, sort of some questions. There may be some online questions, so feel free. I know that we have an online audience as well. So I will start with Pascal, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Melina. My name is Pascal Carnez. I'm the Managing Director of the European Services Forum, representing all the services industry in trade and investment international negotiations. Thank you.
And my name is Eleonora Catella. I am Deputy Director in the International Relations Department of Business Europe, which is an umbrella organization at the EU level representing industry, so all manufacturing companies, big and small, across Europe, in 34 countries actually, beyond the EU 27. Thanks.
Good, thank you. And Laura, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, happy to be with you this early morning in Vancouver. I'm Laura Jones. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and we represent close to 100,000 small businesses across Canada, and we advocate on their behalf.
Super, thank you. And Michael, now up to you.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Michael Harvey. I'm joining you from Ottawa. I am Vice President Policy and International at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce.
Super, and don't hesitate to check the respective websites if you want to look at everyone's more detailed profiles. But let me start with the panel. So the first question here is, so 5 years of CETA has been a great deal of regulatory cooperation on a number of different areas in terms of discussions at committees and formal dialogues. This has already actually been partly addressed during the key speakers, so it will be good to develop on this. Pascal, can you comment on some of the results and how these efforts have helped promote Canada-EU trade?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I wanted maybe to try to focus more on the regulatory cooperation part, which I think is of interest to many. I mean, the trade in services figures are well known, I think. I can come back later on this, maybe. But in terms of regulation, at the beginning or at first sight, we can consider maybe it's nothing as much has happened for regulatory cooperation for the different all services sectors. Maybe I should name these sectors, because when I talk about services, people don't understand exactly what it's really talking about. This is the bank, the insurance, the telecom, the IT, the distribution, the construction, all the transport, and all the famous professional services. So as the ambassador has mentioned, and Jean Charest as well, is that we have a mutual recognition agreement between the EU and Canadian architects to recognize their professional qualifications. And that is the proper concrete result. In terms of machinery, it has taken too long. The EU and the Canadian architect agreed on a text in 2018, but it is now only going to come into force now. That took too long, but it is going to happen. This being said, it's probably going to be changing much in terms of economy. It's probably not going to be thousands of architects flowing and crossing the Atlantic, but it's a good example. The whole question is, are we going to have other sectors doing it? And the answer is, I'm afraid, no. Not yet, at least, because they found other ways to get to the markets of each others. So the accountant, the lawyers, the nurses have other ways to do it. And I'm afraid it is not yet to be done.
I trust we have a good group of people that were working on this just to make sure it's all covered. And Eleonora, do you want to also address this question? And then Laura and Michael, I will come back to you.
Yes, sure. So also thank you very much for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to comment on this. I think CETA has been very innovative in this. So we have a chapter specifically dedicated to regulatory cooperation, which is now something that we get for granted. But at the time, it was quite controversial. Minister Charest has mentioned TTIP, and indeed the association of regulatory cooperation with possible regulatory freezing was pretty scary at that time. So I think it is interesting to look at what has been done in the end with CETA. What has this Chapter 21 on regulatory cooperation achieved 5 years on? So, and I'll mention concrete results and also what we can expect. We have a regulatory cooperation forum, and I think the good parts, very good elements in it is that it establishes a platform for regulators to converse, to discuss things of mutual interest, and also on the basis of interest that has been expressed by stakeholders. So there are consultations, we have been consulted, we were able to present ideas on possible topics. So also the topics that Matthias Jorgensen has mentioned, consumer protection, consumer product safety has been analyzed. And another result was, for example, on cosmetics or cosmetic-like products like some shampoos, toothpaste, other products of like sunscreens. Sometimes they had to be retested before entry into the Canadian market, and this retesting has been eliminated for some products. And this is a significant improvement for those companies, many of them SMEs, that are in this important sector, supporting 2 million jobs in Europe, for those who like figures. So I think this is an important result that we can mention out of this exercise.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. And I think you're right to remind that communication is key, because when it comes to trade and businesses, I'm afraid everyone wants to save some money. So thank you for highlighting this. And Michael, I see you nodding away, so please feel free, and Laura as well.
No, thanks. I think Eleonora summed up well some of the more positive things that have happened. I think regulatory cooperation is always going to be this Sisyphean task, except maybe it's like different boulders going up the mountain. So what we hear about a lot at the chamber are some of the boulders that aren't being pushed. We get a lot of the time our agricultural members, in particular, who are telling us that deregulation can be difficult. So I think that's one area that could be worked on a lot. And another one, I promoted this event the other day on my LinkedIn, and my last job was as a mining executive. So I've got a ton of mining companies who are my contacts on LinkedIn, and several of my old friends who are mining equipment manufacturers from Canada reached out immediately saying, if you're on a panel in Brussels, you have to mention the CE certification requirements. And without knowing too much about the issue, I mean, it's fairly obvious that Canadian mining equipment manufacturers are producing their equipment in a way that is aligned with what EU regulatory agencies want. So there's obviously other boulders to push up those mountains, because definitely it's the type of thing where I mean, it's aligned, but it's just a question of more regulatory cooperation to ensure that the companies don't have these issues.
Thank you, Michael. And I think yes, the key word alignment. It works in all areas. I fully agree. Laura?
Yeah, I just want to come in behind my fellow panelists on this point about regulatory cooperation and make the point that there is I think, a faster road on regulatory cooperation than this kind of pushing the boulders uphill that Michael is talking about, where we're basically dealing with one issue at a time. So we're dealing with the architects, we're dealing with the cosmetics, we're dealing with, we're taking on kind of one issue, and that it's certainly better than not taking on those issues, but it's very slow. And I think we have to get serious about mutually recognizing each other's regulatory standards and regulations across the board with a negative list. So an option, of course, to say, hold on a minute, maybe the Canadian standards or the European standards don't work in one of the respective markets. But I think that's a far more promising approach. It's a bold approach. Canada just had a budget yesterday, and I was pleased to see that at the domestic level, this idea is gaining some traction. And there was a note in the budget about pushing for more mutual recognition within the domestic market in Canada. And just to give you a concrete example of what this can look like, it can look like, that the tariffs aren't there anymore. And certainly in Canada, we don't have that to deal with between provinces. But I'll give you a funny example. Toilet seats in Ontario in construction sites. You need to have a toilet seat with the regulation states you have to have a toilet seat that has a lifting lid. In other parts of Canada, that doesn't exist. So you're allowed to sell the good into that market, but the regulations are effectively preventing you from selling your good into that market if it doesn't have this lifting toilet seat. And I think we need to get very serious about dealing with those barriers as the next frontier of regulatory agreements that are really functional. And certainly for Canada's small businesses, that's very important because there are two big barriers for them. One is the cost, and that's tariffs, shipping, that some of that has been improved, and obviously shipping costs out of the control of the agreements. But the other part of it is the complexity, and that's where you get into the regulatory differences and also the process, some of the processes at the border and the paperwork. So those are important points to make.
Thank you very much. And I think here this is where communication to help with all of those aspects will be definitely key, especially for the small businesses, because when you use the word regulatory, it's usually quite a scary word, because so definitely communication again will be essential here. There was another question related to this, but it's been pretty much addressed. So I will read it out, but if you could maybe just respond in one word, or a couple words, but just so the audience can really get a sense also and remember. Are there other areas where Canada EU should focus? So what is the most important area for you that they should focus on?
Well, for me, there are many sectors where regulatory cooperation could start in one day, financial services being one, the telecom sectors being others. But one has been mentioned by the ambassador, and this is digital trade. And there is a digital partnership agreement between EU and Canada, like we have many others with other countries. And I think this is really essential for the digitalization. So that's an area where we think we should focus on.
Okay, so here we have 3 areas. Eleonora?
Anything that relates to clean technology and all those sectors that can support the green transition. I think there is a lot of opportunity for cooperation between the EU and Canada. We are both leaders in this field. We are committed to a green transition. We are like-minded. We share the same commitment to the fight against climate change, and there are indeed a lot of opportunities also provided by other chapters of CETA, like public procurement and others. So I think we should also look into where it is possible to have a compatible approach in regulation, in legislation, to emerging technologies in the field of carbon capture, how do you calculate emissions embedded in the production of different goods and or services, for that matter, because these things are going to have an impact on the bilateral trade. And I think this is also the spirit of a living agreement. We are not only looking at what we had, but also what are the sectors that are important for the future. Where can we cooperate in a forward-looking manner?
Good. Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad you've raised this because it's important and it was addressed earlier, and I think it gave clarity. So thank you, Michael.
I'd mentioned responsible business conduct. Monsieur Charest gave a very broad vision of a trade bloc of more democratic countries that respect human rights. I work quite a bit on the issue of forced labor and supply chains and due diligence requirements, and we see the EU legislating in the area, Canada announcing that it's legislating in the area, some places in the US announcing in the area, and it's very quickly becoming a regulatory thicket for our importers.
Thank you, Michael. Laura?
Well, I might give the most controversial answer and say all areas. I'm not a fan of picking winners and losers. And I think that we need to flip this question. Where shouldn't we be doing this? And if we start with that question, where shouldn't we be doing this? Where would there be challenges doing this? And we create the list of what we shouldn't be doing. And then we empower everything else, again, through mutual recognition agreements. I understand this is a much bolder approach, a much faster approach, I think, to get where we want to go. And I think we need to change our mindset around, which boulder are we going to start with to, okay, what is not safe for us to do, or what do we need more time to consider, and everything else can get in the kind of green light lane.
I have to say it's a very interesting and bold approach, which I will actually take back with me, even for business. If we can already agree on what we shouldn't be doing, we will all be saving time, and then we can, save time and energy on focus on what's really good and right. So no, good, fair enough. But thank you very much. So now this next set of questions: how can CETA continue to deliver on its promises? Expectations to deliver on a sustainable and responsible growth, focused trade and economic partnership. I see, Pascal, you're ready to talk, but I'm actually thinking that Eleonora, since she addressed that matter, if you could.
Well, yes, in a way I've already addressed this in my previous answer, because if we look at the green transition, for example, so we are looking at the environmental aspect of sustainability. So here we have the contribution that CETA can bring. And also, I want to pick up on that point. That has been made. There are a lot of initiatives, if I look at the European Union side only, on due diligence, corporate social responsibility, forced labor, deforestation. And these are all unilateral initiatives that are coming up that we can expect very soon, or in the next 5 to 6 years, that again are going to have a strong impact on trade. They aim at leveling the playing field, or also increase sustainability, achieve the green transition, and I think we should be beyond the mutual. I can be even more provocative or even more ambitious. Why not having CETA serve as a platform for the two sides to discuss these issues, discuss upcoming legislative initiatives, and see if they can have a compatible approach to this, so that they distort trade in the minimum way, so that also these initiatives are well understood in their intention. So it's not disguised protectionism, but it's really a push to do more, to be ambitious together. So how can we do this together and discussing, presenting what is coming up, and having as much as possible a compatible approach. That would be sustainable growth.
Thank you very much. Michael, I saw you nodding away. Do you want to add something?
I'll always be nodding because I agree with everybody. But I'll mention I'm sitting in Ottawa. Laura already mentioned yesterday's federal budget because Laura, like me in the Canadian advocacy world, thinks that's the most important thing in the world, the Canadian federal budget. But there was a word in the Canadian federal budget yesterday, friendshoring. It's a concept that none of us understand completely, but it's, I think now, Canadian, the government of Canada's policy, right? And in that context, I'd just like to talk about where I think Canada can step up in terms of CETA. I think we really need to beef up our advocacy capacity with groups like the EU. If we're moving towards a world, like Monsieur Chalet says, of a bloc of the democracies, of the countries that respect human rights, I was a bit intimidated when I was invited to this panel because I don't think I know that much about the EU. And then I spent my career between Latin America, the US, and Canada. And then I realized how many EU things affect my work. I look at digital trade, privacy, I look at the responsible business conduct. In a world where these EU regulations affect Canada so much, I think we need more advocacy capacity that really understands the perspective of business. And I just mentioned here at the Chamber, we did a little study that I was tasked to do last year, where I was looking at Canadian Chambers of Commerce, CanChams around the world to sort of see what kind of standards we have. And in Brussels, we have some individuals who are doing great work, right? Mark Camilleri, Sam Ayoub, people who really know the issues, and there's very little institutionality around that. To go back to the Greek mythology, it's Atlas carrying the world on their shoulders. I think in a world where we're going to be working more with the European Union on what this bloc of democracies looks like in the trade world, we're going to have to give people like Mark or Sam more resources to be able to do some of that advocacy work. And it's really the government of Canada that's going to have to step up. We've seen them doing it in the Indo-Pacific region with the new Indo-Pacific strategy. I think the EU should be an area of focus for this sort of thing too.
Thank you very much. I think definitely teamwork and resources is key and essential in improving anything. Pascal, I see you're ready to add something, so please feel free.
Sure. Well, I mean, all the services sectors and companies are also willing to go for the net for zero and becoming the less impacting on their footprint. There are sectors which are more targeted, I would say, with this sustainability aspect. That would be, in terms at least for the environment and climate, the shipping industry and the transport industry, aviation sectors, for instance, in particular, but as well the digital and the tech, because data centers are very much energy consuming, and they are really working hard to try to diminish their footprint. CETA is actually one of the first agreements where we have very deep commitment in terms of environmental services. And these environmental services are part of the solution here. So I'm talking here about waste management, water management, noise reduction, or the air cleaning services. And then if you want to go further, everything related to responsible business conduct and implementing these due diligence and CBAM and deforestation regulation, etc., we know will require a huge amount on consulting services. So that they are part of the solution. And we hope that between EU and Canada, we can develop these services further to go in that direction.
Good. Thank you, Pascal. And Laura, where could there be some other areas of improvements? Because I know that you're in touch with all of the local businesses. So maybe you have a direct feedback that you could share with us?
Absolutely, but maybe just a quick point on the last question as well. A more basic point about the agreement is that, if we remember that what trade agreements do, and I love, Michael, the friendshoring, because these are countries with similar values that are trading in this agreement, and what trade agreements do is they lift incomes And when people have higher levels of income, they can afford, and studies have shown this, that they want more environmental protection, social goods. And so the trade agreement itself is doing that. I also love, Eleanor, your point about it creating some forums for dialogue and discussion. But shifting to the second part of your question, what else could be done? I represent small and mid-sized companies, and for them, I think we cannot underestimate the importance of communication, over communication, and support. So prior to the agreement coming, just prior to the agreement coming into force, we did some surveying of small business, and the vast majority, about 80%, hadn't even really heard about the agreement. Once we gave them a little more information about it, about half of them said, "Oh yes, I would be interested in, looking at and exploring trade." But for smaller businesses, this can be, once a year or twice a year. Sometimes they're dipping their toe into these markets. So it's just making sure that they have the information about the possibilities and then the support they need when they run into trouble. There's a very low awareness about what supports and where to go when there are challenges among the small business community.
Thank you. I understand that there are some guides available and that people can actually call someone and get a person on the other end, because it can be scary when you have to trade with another continent, because even though you do share the same values and you all want to do business together, it's not maybe, something may be very normal here in Brussels, but it's very different in Canada. And so just making sure that, so this is, again, really important to know that CETA is there, but it is also very well documented, and everyone should be aware of it and just use information which is widely available. And if you have any questions, there are loads of people around here who will be able to help you and address all of this. So I just need someone to tell me how much time I have left, but so just to make sure I don't overstep on the second panel, but I think we have a bit of time. Really? Time flies when we're having fun, so we'll make this then, so this, I'm really sorry, means we won't have time for questions, but everyone will be around afterwards, so feel free to come to any of those presents, and we'll make sure that we have your email addresses available if you want to correspond with Michael and Laura directly. So the last question, the trade figures since CETA implementation are impressive. In particular, take up of trade of SMEs. Laura, I will ask you to, because this is also your area of expertise. So is this growth sustainable?
Oh, I think so. I think that there are a number of things that are making it easier for SMEs to reach into these markets, particularly on the digital front with respect to marketing and communication. The cost of that continues to come down as we have new technology, it seems, by the week, that helps people either with their websites or with translation functionality. So I think that there's still a lot of potential. There's a lot of interest among small business, and there's a lot of potential. And what it will take to realize that potential is to continue to make things simpler. So again, that brings us back to the non-tariff barriers, the communication and information, and also the processes that support things. So, we have stories from businesses who, if they get a container that's stuck, flagged for inspection, and then that takes months and months, that can leave a very bad taste. And so figuring out a way to make sure that the concerns of small businesses can get addressed quickly is going to be one of the keys.
Yeah, making sure that there is a smooth process. And again, I see Pascal, you're ready, so go for it. But we have little time, so I will let you speak, and then I will ask for Michael and Eleonora to also speak, so we can close this panel and let the second start.
Well, I agree with Laura that the growth is sustainable. For the trade-in services, it's more complicated to see into the figures. We have a plus 27% between 2017 and 2019, and then we had COVID coming in. And then we had a reduction, for instance, of 412% in reduction in tourism services. So that has seriously impacted. But we are climbing back again from 2021. We don't have the figure for 2022, but no doubt it's going the right direction. I wanted to conclude by saying what you mentioned, the guides that the EU and the Canadian EDC and TCT and the Trade Commissioner Service have put into place for all the business who want to export to EU and to Canada, to know exactly kind of what kind of information I need, where is the license, what kind of, all of those contact details are into these guides, very, very practical. And that is where I think we need to give to the industry so that they know that they can even export more.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Eleonora?
I agree with Pascal and Laura, who had made this point. I think reaching out to companies, this is also our job, for many of us here, to raising awareness to the opportunities that are opened up to CETA. Transparency is very important. The transparency and availability of information in a simple language, in a way that also busy business people working at an SME can understand. And then we have 44% more SMEs that export from the EU to Canada. So this is a good figure. Definitely a result of CETA. So we need to continue on that way, and we need to be indeed more ambitious in regulatory cooperation. We can do more.
Thank you very much. And I think it makes sense to, because often people, what they fear, what they don't understand, then it stops them in their growth. So making sure that the information is available and just making sure that all of these topics are just, user-friendly for everyone, because you can start a business on your own, but then if you want to export, you need to have the right information. So Michael, would you please conclude then this panel?
Sure, just to go with what's been said, I think what would make it more user-friendly at times would be to drill down by sector, by industry, so that SMEs could see documents on their specific interests. And the other thing, maybe do some documents or guides on lessons learned from people who've had problems. We've all done these reports where it's a bunch of smiling people talking about their successes, but sometimes I think we can learn by seeing where somebody else got blocked before we set up our strategy and go in the same direction.
That makes perfect sense. So, well, thank you very much to the four of you, and me, and all of you. But jokes aside, thank you very much, and thank you for having us, and thank you for organizing. And thank you, Mark, as well, for helping with all of this. So I will let the second panel. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Melina, for keeping us on time and some great questions, and indeed the panelists for some even better answers. Lots of thought-provoking and useful practical information. CETA Regulatory Cooperation Forum will actually take place next month. So it's very timely, some of the things you've said just now. And indeed, I'm certain some of my colleagues will have been listening online as well, that will have been taking note of that. So very, very useful. So indeed, as Melina mentioned, we'd like to have our second and final panel for today come up. Please welcome.
Can you hear me now? Is this thing on? Okay. You think years of working in television, I still haven't got it right. Thanks so much for joining me, and I realize we now stand between the rest of you and your cocktail reception, so we will keep it brief as we go into these fascinating topics. And of course, I think many of us will remember the day we came to talk about trade and learned about toilet seats. I certainly will. It's so useful to have those real life examples. My name is Rosie Burchard. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels, most of the time now working for German television, but over the last year I've reported extensively also for CBC News. So like many of you in this room, used to these time differences and crossing the Atlantic in a virtual way at least. And now let me introduce you, of course, to those that are joining me here, our panelists, the ones you came to listen to. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Louis Roy, who is the CEO of Optel Group. Now, Optel is a leading global provider of traceability, track and trace, and vision systems for many industries. So that's all about data for each step of the supply chain, everything from raw materials right through to the consumer. And then I'd like to introduce you to Vincent L'Ouest. He is the International Nuclear Business Development and Sales Manager with Tractebel. And Tractebel being a global engineering company, specialist expertise in water and energy. And Vincent and his colleagues, of course, are busy helping to engineer that carbon neutral future we're all hoping for. And Tractebel now has a presence in more than 70 countries. I believe we're also expecting to be joined by another panelist who I can't yet see, but now I do. So let's cross the Atlantic to Shannon Blanchard, who is Director of Supply Chain Innovation at the Port of St. John. Of course, busy physically connecting businesses across the Atlantic, and the port describes itself as an engine for the critical transportation infrastructure of Canada, at a cornerstone of the New Brunswick economy. Now, let's get into the discussion here. I think, Shannon, let's start with you. Now, over the past 5 years, CETA has proven to be, as many of you know, a very important and a reliable tool for high growth trade between Canada and the European Union. But let's look into the future. Shannon, how do you think the numbers will change over the next 5 years?
Well, over the last 3 years since the pandemic hit us and realizing the complexities within the supply chain, I really see a favorable situation occurring. During the pandemic, we've seen rates for containers, for example, going from $1,500 per container, Canadian dollars, maximizing at about $25,000 per container. So we're seeing those numbers actually decline and coming more in line with pre-pandemic numbers. So obviously having a supply chain that is fluid but also affordable will definitely assist in building that bilateral trade piece between Canada and Europe. So as far as numbers goes, I see that there's favorable scenarios with regards to our supply chain and also adding in capacities. The federal government, along with the province of New Brunswick and the Port of St. John, we're adding in additional capacity to assist with that growth. Now, if we look at last year, for example, the Port of St. John alone, seeing a 72% growth year over year with respect to our container growth. And with that 72% growth, about, I would say 60 to 70% of that was either origin or destined for the European market from Canada. So favorable scenarios there, and it's looking very promising.
Very promising indeed. Thanks so much for those insights, Shannon. Vincent, I want to come to you because I think you have a really concrete example for us to go into. Why did you open the office in Canada?
Thank you. Yes, good question. First of all, we're celebrating here the fifth anniversary of CETA. We are the young kids on the block because we will be shortly celebrating the first anniversary of the opening of our office in Canada. So it is we're still in the very young phases of developing our business there. But to your question, there were actually two reasons. One that is shorter term, and as you have heard from the introduction, my background is nuclear, so we are going to talk a bit about niche business that maybe not many of you are familiar with, but this is becoming more and more something that going beyond the traditional nuclear. And this is one of the reason why we've been looking at Canada. It is in the overall industries that are looking at decarbonizing their operations. There are many options. We are active as Tractebel in all of these options, but also we do strongly believe that the nuclear is one of them. We actually believe that we will not get there without the nuclear. And not only the traditional nuclear, but there is something that is moving in the world of the nuclear. It is what we call the small modular reactors. It is a new generation that is much more affordable. We're talking of roughly just a number of $1 billion investment. So this is a nuclear that is now affordable for private businesses. We are not just like in the past where only governments could afford going to nuclear. And so that is the first reason why we're in Canada, is because the entire world is now looking at Canada, because the first SMR that will be deployed will be connected to the grid in 2028, according to the plan, is in Ontario, with Ontario Power Generation in Darlington. So the entire world is looking at what's happening there. And on top of that, and I will finish up with that. On top of that, there is another reason why we are very much interested in Canada, is because, and North America globally, is because all the big actors that are big continental industries have a very strong presence in North America, of course. And there are two things there. First of all, they are looking at doing synergies between the way they operate on the two sides of the ocean, and they are all starting to think of what's in SMR for me. Industries start to recognize that DSMR is one option, and they are new to nuclear, and we are experts in nuclear. So without Canada was the perfect match to open our office and to play on these two I would say, two sides of the coin.
Thank you very much, Louis. I'd love to go to you to look at what you think for the next 5 years ahead. We've spoken about what's been going well over the past 5. What about the years ahead? And do you have any specific actions or investments that you're planning to implement in this period that we're looking ahead to? Thank you.
Well, it's a complex question because there are many things that are changing, especially due to the speed we need to go to address decarbonization. So I moved in Europe personally for a year because I thought Europe is going to move much faster than Canada on the decarbonization and supply chain intelligence. So for us, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be in Europe. So we have operation in Ireland, operation in Germany, and we see an increasing demand from a larger player everywhere around Europe to get real information about the supply chain. But I think we need to work together with Canada because Canada is not that fast. So, because of course we have our US neighbor that are not that fast neither, much less faster. So I think Canada will be, need to be, to move and understand the regulation. That's why the collaboration between the regulation, but we don't want to slow down Europe because Europe is going to impact all the supply chain around the world to accelerate decarbonization and the other ESG. But Canada have to understand that we're going to need to move fast, and maybe we won't have stronger regulation as in EU, but if we want to keep exporting, we're going to need to address that. So I think it's a challenge there, and I hope you will keep a strong position because we need that. And by the way, our mission is to bring supply chain within the planetary boundary. And currently, I think Europe understands that. The EU regulator are taking the risk to push, make that push. But Canada company need to address that. Like there is the EU regulation on deforestation. There are some stress in Canada, but technology is there. And yes, there'll be some change on the logistic of grain and etc. But that need to happen because we need to stop deforestation ASAP. So there'll be challenge, but there'll be huge opportunity. But that's depending on our openness. If we listen to our US side, or say, oh, no regulation, nothing on ESG, that's what we're hearing on part of US. Well, we might lose speed in Europe.
Speed, that's the message from you then, and keep up the regulatory pace. Now, Shannon, I'd love to cross back to you. Let's cross the Atlantic again to Shannon. Can you tell us a bit about which Canada or EU markets you'd like to develop in the future, and what kind of form might that take?
Certainly. So with respect to our investments that we're making that I referenced earlier, it's adding the capacity to build out a more diverse and inclusive supply chain option for connecting Canada and Europe. And the beauty with that is, there was some discussion about the friendshoring piece. And the realization of that is having connectivity that's closer and faster. So over the last 12 months, We, along with our supply chain partners, including the main railways here in Canada, that actually gives us connectivity across the nation, have established some direct routes into Europe. So the beauty with Europe, obviously, is because of the proximity to each of those locations, some of those critical ports that we're connecting to today, looking at ports in Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and Belgium, we're actually significantly closer, and optionality here for connecting across Canada is significant. And as we add capacity with our infrastructure developments, we're going to be able to continue to add those more direct routes. So that in itself is critical for accessing each of our supply chain networks, and also creating optionality, but also creating a more fluid network. There was a lot of congestion and disruption over the last 3 years, and through these investments, we're creating alternative solutions for those importers and exporters in each of the regions of the world.
Thanks so much for that. Vincent, I'll come back to you. First of all, happy birthday, almost, to the office in Canada. And I pass the same question over to you, really. You touched on it a bit in your first answer, but maybe you want to develop it further about which Canada and EU markets you'd like to develop in future, and again, what kind of form could that take? Where could we see it going?
Yes, yeah, indeed. The intent, the ambition that Tractable has in setting up this operation in Canada is to grow that business to become a kind of you said we are already in many countries. This is new to Canada. Right now we have got 2 people coming from Belgium, so we've got a hiring plan in place. The intent and the objective is to more or less to make this business become autonomous with all the engineering. And there is an issue that I will share with you, because I guess that may be interesting for any business who intend to go to Canada, and it relates to the first panel. But so the intent is to grow that business to accompany our nuclear and global bicontinental enterprise on the 2 sides of the ocean as well. They do look for synergies on the 2 sides, and we want to be there on the 2 sides to support them optimally. But back to this small question that relates to this first panel, it is an example that we are facing, and that is a concrete problem. A problem that we do have today is that our engineers today cannot work as engineers in Canada, because they are not recognized as professional engineers, P.Eng. So I'm cheating a bit. I will ask the question to the first panel, even we could not. It is about the example that you gave that I was not aware of, that for the architects, there has been an agreement in 2018 that is coming through now. So would you think that to help for us to get the same situation where our engineers, obviously we will hire Canadian engineers, but our European engineers could operate in Canada. The fact that this has been signed for the architects, it's similar business. Do you think we could go faster than 5 years for the engineers? Yes. That could be. Yeah, that would be great. So that's something, I guess, and I finish with that. There is an agreement in place with many countries that for these engineers, it is the Washington Accord back to 1998 with UK, Ireland, plus Canada, US, Australia, South Africa, and so on. But in geographical Europe, the only 2 who are part of it are UK and Ireland. All the others are not part of it. So today, cannot act as professional engineers, and that's something that we hope we will improve somehow.
I think it's important to talk about these problems, because of course it's only by raising them that you can spark ideas towards solution. You brought up the topic of essentially labour shortages, and of course we've spoken so much about what the EU and Canada share here today, sharing cultural values, agreeing on many topics, but of course they also share challenges, and labour shortages are one of them. Perhaps I can come to you, Louis, on that question of labour shortages in Canada and the EU. How are you addressing that, and can CETA play a role in that?
Well, yeah, it's pretty dramatic, especially in Quebec City. I think where the employment rate is below 2%. That's bad. So it's a big issue. Of course, Canada, you saw last year, was very aggressive on immigration to bring talent back in. So I guess many open ears on simplifying the bringing engineer, because we need a lot, but we need of everything in Canada. So that's a concern, and we know, operating in Germany, it's almost impossible to hire in Germany neither. So it's pretty hard. Our solution, I think, here it's the mobility of the people. So we have operation in India, operation in Brazil. So having the flexibility to bring people in Canada or in Europe, it's key, because I think if we want to keep our level of living in Europe and Canada, we're going to need to bring other resource outside this. So I think that's maybe not just between Canada and Europe, but that's the flexibility. Otherwise, for me, not having a backup in Brazil and India, I would not sleep at night, because how are we going to sustain a growth?
So really, it's free movement in the broader sense of the term.
Exactly, yeah.
Shannon, can I invite you to comment on that part? Do you have any comment on this question of labor shortages? Can CETA play a role in there? Is this something that a challenge that you're bearing witness to as well?
I would say in Atlantic Canada, it's a little bit of a different environment. We have been aggressively looking to recruit and build up our union here at the port, and we've been very successful repositioning some of our folks that had moved out of the province to come back into a trade that is very favorable. So we're not impacted here in St. John at this point. And you know, it's very good to have some of our residents that once had to leave to have a good sustainable income move back into our province to support the economy here locally.
Shannon, stay with you. I just want to look a bit closer into the future. You mentioned earlier that the future looks bright, and you gave us a couple of examples of ports in Europe as well. Can you give us a couple of different scenarios? So you have one way, which could be the bright future. What could really trip you up in the years ahead? What are you hoping to avoid?
I think the last few years really have, as a nation, really put a critical lens under the supply chain. And I think we as a nation need to ensure that we are not put into that position again. Creating bottlenecks within the supply chain as a whole has critical impacts, not just from from an economic standpoint of exporting as a country, but also importing critical goods that we as a nation need to have access to. So we're working together with the federal government to ensure that we can ensure that there's a fluid and open network. So if there is disruption again in the future, like we've seen in the last 3 years, that there will be optionality for folks to be able to export goods or receive those critical goods. And building out that capacity is really instrumental, but also ensuring that there's capacity. So I talked about the supply of containers, just the equipment itself created such an influx in the value to ship goods that it really created a pinch point for some industries of importing and exporting certain sectored developed and manufactured goods.
Maybe on this, another point on this shortage of experts. I'm traveling pretty much across Europe, and in particular for nuclear, but I guess this is probably the true for other specific niche industries. For youth, young people to start embracing a nuclear career, it is very clear in many countries that the sign from the political has to be very clear that the decision will be made and a certainty that the nuclear has a future. And of course,
it's a divisive issue here in Europe, right?
Yeah, and training these people is not something that you do overnight. So let's get the political world keep in mind the fact that we understand that the decisions are important and everything, but that they have an impact as well on the future of the staffing for that technology in particular, and I guess that may apply to others as well, I guess.
So we have 3 minutes left for our panel, and that means I can give you 1 minute each, in which I'd love you just to give us any last thoughts, last words, a few words or a phrase, just to sum up your vision, your hopes for these next 5 years after the 5 years that we've just gone through.
Okay, in 5 years, many people are talking about 2050 to become carbon neutral. In my opinion, if you saw the GIEC report, it's way too late. So in 5 years, I think if Canada and Europe and bring other countries in to really accelerate decarbonization. And you need to do nuclear reactor much faster, okay? 5 years is way too long. I know it's an enormous challenge in front of us, but okay, we're worldwide and everything will be crumbling pretty fast. So we need to adjust the supply chain and adjust our processes and make sure we don't dump emission in third country, because that's not going to solve the problem. So our hope is, okay, we share common value. I'm going to go back in Canada and keep making pressure on all the industry to decarbonize. We have to accelerate this movement. That's my main concern. Everything else doesn't matter. What matters is delivering a sustainable future for our children. And in this currently, there's no water. They haven't rained since a year, so it's kind of stressful. And I think people in France are highly stressed about that. So we need to work on that.
Thank you, Louis. Vincent, I pass to you.
Yes, quickly. I think if I need to point out what I believe will be the key for the 5 coming years is really harmonization on all these regulatory things. That will just ease the business. We in the business needs to go with all the regulations, and that is absolutely normal. But the fact that we can try to improve the harmonization will make the life much easier to the businesses that will work across the ocean. I think that is number one, in particular with nuclear, because we know that in nuclear the regulatory aspect is very heavy. Yeah, we have this dual use that the ambassador was referring to before. We need export license for our goods, because our goods are to do nuclear reactors, but could be used for weapons or even non-Pacific use. So all that is very heavy on our side. So we are counting on all these brave people looking into this to help us, and hopefully not waiting 5 more years, but as fast as you can.
Thank you very much. Shannon, the last word is yours.
Wow, lucky me. So I would say that building upon the success that we've been seeing as a port with regards to the bilateral trade over the last year, I'm very encouraged and hopeful that with the, I would say, bridging the distance and adding the capacity and the diversification in direct service connectivity between Europe and Canada, that trend will continue. There's a lot of components within our realities, and our realities being the geopolitical situations and looking at, friendshoring when it comes to certain commodities and products that we once would have been reliant on for some countries that may not be of particular interest to work with. I think that trend will continue. And as we invest and grow as a nation here in Canada, to build out the capacities and the diversification in our connectivity to bridge that distance, I only see a very favorable trade bilaterally between Canada and Europe.
Thank you, Shannon, for bridging the distance for us. That was Shannon Blanchard. She is the Director of Supply Chain Innovation at the Port of St. John. And I've been joined here in the room by Louis Roy, who's the CEO of Optel Group, and Vincent L'Ouest, the International Nuclear Business Development and Sales Manager with Tractebel. I'm Rosie Birchard. Thank you so much for your time.
Wow. 2 terrific panels. Thank you so much. I want to thank you, first of all the participants that joined online in person. Wonderful to have you. Very pleased from my point of view about how it went, and I think we've had some great conversations today. one point, and there's been a lot of questions about guides referred to, mutual recognition agreements, how can we facilitate that? We do have these things right here at the mission. In fact, we've done some. We have a trade commissioner service that operates in many of the EU 27 countries and across the globe, in fact. By the way, it's a free service for Canadian companies and for investors from Europe that were interested in coming to Canada. So I encourage you to reach out to me for sure, and I can connect you to all of my colleagues. Happy to do that and connect you to the guides. That's not the only way, of course. We can give you some basic knowledge that you need, but you also probably want to talk to professionals. So the type of organizations like SAM's Canada-EU Economic Chamber, like Mark's Canada-EU Trade Investment Association, like the first panel that had associations as well. All of these places can connect you if you're looking for that type of information as well. So I urge you to connect with them. It's now also the opportunity for me to thank some people that helped very much in the organization of this event, so bear with me, please. Of course, the speakers and panelists, thank you so much. You make this event work so well, so thank you, and of course, the moderators and so on. The organizers that organize this event for us and with us, Sam, Ayub, Mark Camilleri, thank you so much to you and your organizations, very much appreciated. To our tech team, you noticed there was no tech issues today. That's because we have a fabulous tech team, Morrison Chapman, and our own IT team. Thank you very much, Chris and Alexandra. Fantastic job, and Nicolas as well. You will have enjoyed some hospitality, and you will right after this. Don't worry. And so my colleagues, Nida and Fatima, who've organized all this, we call this Espace Canada, but sometimes we refer to it as Nida's space because it's very much thanks to her for setting that up. So thank you to them. Chris Geisen for setting this up very much. Our interns that helped guide you in here and welcomed you at the beginning, Laurent, Edouard, Sophie, and Loic, and our volunteers, Lisa and Sam, who was happy to jump in as well. Luca and the security team for getting you through. Thank you so much. My dear colleague, Simone Borgia, who has helped me organize all of this. And finally, I invite all of you to enjoy our hospitality, to carry on this conversation as we enjoy each other's company. So thank you so much for coming, and look forward to talking to you further. And that's it.
Dankeschön.